What makes a dog the perfect best friend for a president? Like the Cavalier King Charles Ronald Reagan almost lost to a freak accident, or the dog that managed to bring a commander-in-chief to tears, or Franklin Roosevelt's German Shepherd who famously ripped the pants off dignitaries. On this special Dogs 101, we take a peek at the famous first dogs and what makes these presidents' Pooches ideal companions to the leaders of the free world.
But I've already given you an important job.
Animals have long been treasured tenets of Washington, D.C., whether livestock, wildlife, gifts from afar, or precious family pets.
Their great ability to be stress relieving, I think, is probably the most wonderful asset that pets in general have given to the presidents.
The president's dogs have captured our hearts throughout the centuries. In fact, more dogs have lived in the White House than presidents and their families combined, totaling over 200 pampered Pooches.
Being a pet owner is almost a prerequisite for being a good president. The idea of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue without one makes it seem very barren.
George Washington had multiple hounds. Lincoln's canine companion was a mixed breed named Fido.
Ulysses S. Grant had a Newfie.
Buchanan's dog, Laura, who was a Newfoundland, was known to lie motionless in the White House, but always keeping one eye on the president.
President Warren Harding chose the Airedale Terrier.
The Airedale is a breed that I think is well suited for a president because it is considered the king of terriers. It also is a dog that is pretty tenacious, like most terriers, which I think a president has to be.
Laddie Boy was Harding's precious pet. Not only did he have his own hand-carved chair for high-level meetings, he was also presented with a birthday cake built entirely of biscuits. The Kennedy family was overflowing with pets.
He seemed to surround himself by animals, and I believe he built a special area, sort of play area, for children and dogs off one end of the west wing of the White House.
Kennedy loved his dog so much that he mandated that when he arrived in the presidential helicopter, his dogs always had to be there to greet him.
Sometimes White House pups go from pampered pets to political allies, like when Nixon came under scrutiny for accepting gifts.
Nixon, somebody accused him of misappropriation of some $18,000, and so he used his dog in a speech to kind of get himself off the hook.
Nixon explained that the money was for campaign expenses, but admitted that he had accepted one gift from a supporter, a Cocker Spaniel named Checkers.
Regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it.
And somehow that endeared him to the American public, that he was prepared to hang everything on the line for a dog.
President Gerald Ford held a very special place in his heart for Liberty, a golden retriever.
Coddled, I think, would be a good word to use when it came to how President Ford felt about the dog. Constantly at his side in the Oval Office.
Goldens are one of the most highly trainable breeds, and this worked in Ford's favor.
President Ford used to use Liberty as a tension breaker and to even end meetings with people in the Oval Office.
Ford would make some kind of gesture and Liberty would immediately jump up and go across, tail wagging, and interrupt everything, and that signaled the end of the meeting.
Another lovable retriever was President Clinton's Labrador, who helped his president on a more personal level.
Somebody once said that Buddy was the only friend he had in the White House who could not testify against him.
The dogs provide a soothing atmosphere for the presidents, I believe, and Buddy was no exception.
The night Barack Obama was elected, he made a promise to his daughters that sparked a national debate.
Sasha and Malia, you have earned the new puppy that's coming with us to the White House.
The whole country had opinions on what the Obamas should get.
Golden Doodles are great. I don't think they need a poodle.
A golden retriever.
He wants to get a mixed breed dog because he says that represents him.
The Obamas chose Bo, a Portuguese water dog given to them by Senator Kennedy. Bo is related to Kennedy's dog, Splash. The girls named him after their cousin's cat and their grandfather, who people called Diddley. And while Bo doesn't sleep with the president,
Gonna be in a bed?
Not in my bed.
he has a pretty good life. Whether a Democrat or Republican, a first dog is a must for any president. When we come back, we'll meet the dog who brought George W. Bush to tears. And we'll find out about the near tragedy that almost took President Reagan's dog, Rex.
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
Please donate now to help people affected by the 2025 California wildfires.
The White House has been home to many famous Pooches, including George Herbert Walker Bush and his wife Barbara's famed English Springer Spaniel, Millie.
They are beautiful dogs. They can be very affectionate and sometimes good with their family, but not all of them.
I know Mrs. Barbara Bush quite frequently would kiss Millie on her nose. She called it a pig nose.
When you're president, everything gets documented, even what happens in the shower.
There's a story that President 41, George Herbert Walker Bush, used to share his shower with Millie. The truth is, it's absolutely the truth.
Millie's pampering didn't end there. When she gave birth to her puppies at the White House, Mrs. Bush was right next to her.
We pulled a mattress off of one of the beds in the adjacent room and laid it on the floor for Mrs. Bush to be a little bit more comfortable while Millie was giving birth to her pups.
But what really put Millie, the Springer Spaniel, over the top in popularity was her book, which, by the way, outsold books written by both Bush presidents.
It was a bestseller. Everybody loved Millie. Everybody loved her puppies. And one of her puppies, of course, everyone knows went on to be George Bush's Spot.
10 years old, but she still likes to play. The snow's making her young.
When George W. entered the White House, he brought Spot with him. But sadly, Spot didn't leave the White House with the president.
On the evening before Spotty was put down, the president was out on the South grounds, lying on the grass with Spot actually cradled in his arms. As you can tell from my voice, it was a very poignant moment. And that's the kind of relationship the families have with their pets.
After Spotty passed away, Bush's Scotties, Barney and Miss Beasley, had big shoes to fill. The Scottie is one of the most popular breeds for presidents.
It's a little surprising because, as a general rule, Scottish Terriers are extremely tenacious, but maybe that's part of why presidents like them, because they feel that they have a companion who's going to look out for them and not let anybody mess with them.
Some think they do more than look out for them, but also look like them.
I always think in the case of George Bush that the dog actually looks a bit like him. You know, they say people look like their dogs, and there's this sort of bushy eyelids, and, you know, they're both very tenacious nature.
The country fell in love with Barney and Miss Beasley. They were even the first presidential Pooches to have their own webpage.
Barney, I hear you've been hiding Beasley's gift all around the White House. Perhaps this is a case of sibling rivalry.
Maybe not just sibling rivalry.
The first thing that the president would do when he came to the residence floors was greet the dog, then his wife, actually, in that order.
A lot of times when I knew that my husband was making very, very difficult decisions and was weighing the difficult decisions he made, I'd look out the window of the White House from above and see him on the lawn with the dogs and know that that was a time of the day that he could walk out and be by himself with them.
But Barney and Miss Beasley have a hard time upstaging FDR's famous Scottish Terrier, Fala.
There's never been a dog like Fala in the White House, and there never will be.
And it was this famous shot that made everybody fall for Fala.
There was the inauguration in January of 1941, and Fala came running out of the White House and jumped in the presidential limousine and took what he knew would be his seat right next to the president.
Fala even had breakfast in bed with Roosevelt every morning.
Dinner time was a real ritual for Fala. He had to roll over, he had to stand up and beg, and then he had to shake hands. And finally, he got his dinner.
Fala traveled everywhere with FDR. He was his quintessential sidekick.
Fala was present, you know, as the president was signing treaties with Winston Churchill, you know, off the coast of Newfoundland.
One of the most famous speeches made by the president to the Teamsters Union was in reference to his Scottie dog.
These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me or on my wife. They now include my little dog, Fala. I don't resent attacks. Fala does resent it.
When FDR passed away, Fala knew it.
Fala was lying on the bed, I believe, and suddenly stood up and seemed to be looking at something in the air and started to act kind of crazy at the precise time that FDR was proclaimed dead.
Fittingly, Fala was buried in the Rose Garden at Hyde Park, next to FDR and Eleanor. And Fala is the only first dog to have a statue at a national monument. After the break, which president was the greatest dog lover? And we meet the dogs that committed impeachable offenses in the White House. What's life like for a dog living in the White House? It isn't bad.
You're gonna have the best vets, you're gonna have the best food, you're gonna get plenty of walks. It's a pretty good life.
Speaking of food, with 5 full-time world-class chefs, the White House kitchen is a pretty palatable place for a dog. But does the chef make the dog's food?
The answer is no. The dogs get the prescribed meal that the veterinarians suggest. I won't say that extra treats aren't given from time to time.
Yeah, I tell you, it's hard to resist a dog when they're asking for something to eat.
With all this top brass care, do the White House dogs have doggy doubles or Secret Service agents?
To my knowledge, there's never been a double for any of the presidential pets. I can't imagine that there'd be a circumstance that would require that.
For instance, the White House grounds are safe. On 18 acres, the main residence has 6 levels with 132 rooms and 35 bathrooms. That's 55,000 square feet of secure space for a pooch to play.
They're running up and down the corridors and having tremendous fun, and they go out on the lawns, they run this way and they run that way, and, you know, I think it's just amazing.
Good thing a 4-year term for a pooch is 32 dog years.
It's going to be a dog's life, and I can't think of any better place to have that life than at the White House.
And belonging to Lyndon Baines Johnson, arguably the greatest dog lover of all the presidents, topped all. He even sent out Christmas cards with a picture of himself and his dogs.
My father was just devoted to animals, really of all kinds, but specifically to dogs.
He lived for his dogs, and I think that says a lot about the man.
LBJ really understood dogs.
His drawers were laden with dog chew toys and bones.
Lyndon Johnson had 7 dogs that lived in the White House during his presidency. 5 beagles, a collie, and a mutt. The first and most famous of all the dogs in the LBJ administration were his beagles, him and her.
I don't think any member of the family would want to take credit for the fact that they got those names.
If you're going for choosing a dog that gets you great press and warms you up to America, I think you hit the nail right on the head with a dog that inspired Snoopy.
These dutiful dogs helped campaign for LBJ's re-election to the presidency in '64. LBJ won by 15 million votes, gaining the nickname Landslide Johnson. While the beagles got the most famous, LBJ's greatest love of all was a mutt.
We had a particular dog that lit up my father's life that sometimes has not gotten the play that the beagles did.
Yuki was a terrier, a mixed breed.
So I took this little dog that had been abandoned at Johnson City filling station home to the LBJ ranch.
Yuki and LBJ's relationship all began when Lucy snuck the dog into the White House kennel while she went on vacation.
And I thought, you know, my parents aren't going to see, they're not going to know. I came back about a week later to discover on the front page of the New York Times a picture of my father, and lo and behold, but who was in the background of this photograph but Yuki. And I was just mortified because obviously I had been caught in having left my dog who had not been invited to the White House.
LBJ and Yuki had quickly bonded, so Lucy gave the dog to her father for his birthday.
My father had absolutely fallen in love with this dog. He adored the concept that an abandoned dog at a country filling station, a mutt with no pedigree whatsoever, sleeping with the President of the United States.
One of LBJ's favorite pastimes was to sing duets with Yuki.
Yuki would react to a high-pitched voice and would sing along with it.
The dog would look at the president and go, "Woo!"
LBJ would sing with Yuki in front of just about anyone. including the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain.
His mouth dropped open, and there was the president and the dog sitting in the Oval Office, a-howling and a-howling.
After Johnson left the White House, he took Yuki back to the LBJ Ranch.
On the day that my father died, my mother said to me, Lucy, there's one person I'm going to ask you to tell about your dad. So I said, Mother, who's that? And she said, will you tell Yuki? And my mother was the last person on earth to view Yuki as a person. But that night, she did.
Lucy brought LBJ's beloved Yuki home to live with her, where he lived 6 more years. Coming up, we'll find out about the near tragedy the White House staff kept secret from the Reagans.
Hold your face in this warm embrace. Time we won't waste. When whispers are soft, where our hearts belong, making spirits strong. Together we'll belong. Let it go, my heart, right from the start. We'll never part. Love's a
Not all the president's pooches had an outstanding reputation. Some were determined to make mischief. But what do you do with a naughty dog who belongs to the president? The Reagans had a Cavalier King Charles named Rex. The Cavy was the favorite of European royals. Perfect for the White House, right? Well, depends on who you ask.
He was always yapping and barking and nipping at people's ankles and wasn't exactly the favorite of all the staff.
Rex, over here, boy.
Rex's constant yapping did not amuse President Reagan.
The president related, I think, in his diary that he thought sure that Rex was barking at Lincoln's ghost.
Rex almost became a ghost himself during one near-fatal mishap. It all started when a staffer escorted Rex up the White House elevator after a late-night walk.
The person who was walking the dog stepped off of the elevator, and the dog stepped off of the elevator, and the next thing you know, the elevator doors are closing. But he doesn't notice that the dog is scooted back onto the elevator, and suddenly the elevator's going down.
To the horror of the staffer, the elevator doors closed on Rex's leash.
Luckily, the elevator only went to the first floor, and the engineer went running down.
The doors open up, and the poor dog is hanging about the side off the ground by his leash.
Rex was grateful to escape unharmed. So was the staffer.
I don't think you want to kill Mrs. Reagan's dog.
The president and Mrs. Reagan never found out about that.
The White House, like the home of any pet owner, has had its fair share of messes.
Your job is to do what you were hired to do, plus whatever else needs to be done. If that involves cleaning up after Barney or Buddy, yeah, you do it.
Dogs have a mind of their own, and sometimes presidential dogs feel the need to mark their territory, even if it's the White House Christmas tree.
I believe it was Barney who went over to the tree and he lifted his leg.
And then there's the time that Millie got a little bored at one of George H.W. Bush's speeches.
He's at the podium, and Millie is right in front of the podium, and she's squatting. And Mrs. Bush has this look on her face, oh, I didn't see it, I did not see it.
First Lady Mamie was no fan of President Eisenhower's Weimaraner Heidi. Heidi was overprotective of Ike, jumping on the First Lady anytime she got too close to the president. Then Heidi went too far.
Heidi soiled one of the rugs in the White House. My grandmother was a typical general's wife.
People said it cost the taxpayers about $20,000 for destroying the carpet.
As a result of this fatal error on Heidi's part, Heidi got sent into exile.
Lucky for Heidi, exile proved to be doggy heaven at the Gettysburg Farm. When dogs have their run of the place, sometimes things can get a little wild. President Clinton's lab Buddy and President Ford's golden retriever Liberty invaded the White House fountain whenever they could.
If they were hot, they would jump into the fountain. If they were chasing birds, they'd jump into the fountain. If they just wanted to chase the water, they'd jump into the fountain.
But diving into the fountain is better than diving into a formal breakfast.
Roosevelt's setter at one point actually went into the dining room and ate 18 breakfasts that had been set out for a diplomatic meeting. And actually the president said that the dog would have drank the coffee if it had been put out as well.
But even that paled in comparison to the near international incident caused by Franklin Roosevelt's German Shepherd, Major.
FDR had an incident with British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald where it sort of ripped the seat out of his pants and rendered him indecent.
This was during a time when war was about to break out, so that must have been a really hard thing to deal with on a PR level, to have a German dog fighting the British ambassador.
At least he wasn't caught on camera. Barney Bush caused quite a stir with his snap at Reuters reporter John Decker.
I asked if I could pet him, and his handler said, sure, no problem. Well, Barney obviously wasn't okay with that, and he took a nip out of my right index finger. I've covered so many stories here at the White House over the years, but it takes getting bit by Barney to get the kind of attention that I've received.
But who was at fault here, Barney or the reporter?
You have to respect old dog space. That would be a good lesson for anyone who saw on television the Barney snapping incident.
They were very kind and gracious in terms of the note that Mrs. Bush sent to me apologizing on behalf of both herself and Barney. She said that he's in the doghouse.
What is it about the White House that can bring out the worst in dogs?
I think that it's probably stressful to live in the White House for a dog because there's so much going on, there's so much chaos, and I would imagine there's not as much consistency as would be ideal for a dog.
Every little thing they do wrong is magnified by the press. Why is that? Well, because it makes news, and people love news to hear how their dog misbehaved, just like our dog misbehaved.
Whatever the case, there's one member of the White House staff that doesn't worry about a dog misbehaving.
Well, I'll tell you, a dog would never bite the cook. We are the source of all wonderful snacks.